If you are a leader intent on developing other leaders, recognize that the environment that you are creating will provide for others.
Hi, and welcome to ReedFlections, a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. I'm your host, Art Calderon, and I'm here with Reed Nyffeler. Reed is a CEO of a global franchising security firm here in the heartland of America. A husband, a father, a published author. Season 2, we're now into Season 2. We're seasoned podcasters. I don't know if you could tell. Right, Reed?
What kind of seasoning? Different conversation.
Season 2, we're talking about developing authentic and intentional leaders. Now we're in the middle of episodes 1 through 4. Why develop leaders? That's what we're calling episodes 1 through 4. Why develop leaders? And here we are, episode 4. Provisional. Love it. Provisional. Leaders embrace providing for the needs of others and the organization. Now, last time we talked about humility and how important that was in leaders. So why, following on that theme, why is it so critical for leaders to see others' needs ahead of their own? I mean, you have this great vision, this great idea. I want to grow this company. I want to grow this organization. But you're saying it can't just be about you as a leader and what you want, but you got to somehow prioritize the needs of others. Tell us more about that.
That's really what leaders create environments that do. They provide for others, right? If you're truly a leader that has exponential growth, which we talked about last time, the result of that is there's providing environments that are places people want to be. You're a good leader, an effective leader. And so, I think a story as we kind of, the series of the first 4 seasons that come together that kind of encapsulates all portions of it all, I think is a great place to start, is probably currently one of my favorite biblical parables. And I love the depth of it all, and it's really about a leader and ultimately how he showed exponential growth that ultimately provided. And this parable is about a rich ruler that had 3 different people that he was going to give talents to, or in this case, let's say it's money. And so as he gave that money, he gave let's use thousands of dollars. He gave $10,000 to one person, $5,000 to another, and $1,000 to the third. And he had, over a period of time, said, come back and bring back the resources and show me what we had. The person that had $10,000 brought back another $10,000, so he had $20,000. The person that had $5,000 brought back another $5,000. He had $5,000. The person that had $1,000 knew this leader expected exponential growth, so he did not want to lose it. He was risk averse, and he buried it and only brought back the $1,000. And so in that scenario, the person that had $1,000, that ruler was upset. He then pulled back that $1,000 and gave it to the person that had already had $10,000, that doubled it to $20,000, and they now had $21,000. And so that's just the summary in an Americanized, U.S. dollars scenario of what happened. And so why do I love that story? First, let's talk about the leader. He had developed enough resources that if he gave away, in this case, $16,000, it didn't affect him. And so he knew that in order for him to double that and expand that, he wanted to invest that somewhere else to develop someone else and see their ability as a leader in their own right to divide that.
So he was risking too.
He was risking
more than anybody,
$16,000 in this scenario that I described. But he had already built enough wealth. So we have to expect that he was a leader in some right, because he had the respect of the people and he was there. So now he's like, how do I go teach others and demonstrate and give them an opportunity to develop their skills, right? And so he saw these 3 individuals. At the same time he was assessing their abilities as leaders. Why do I say that? Because if he had, let's say, 15,000, he could have given them 5,000, 5,000, 5,000. But he already assessed by watching them that they had varied opportunities of return. And that was the 10, 5, and 1. Then, as we hear in his story, let's follow this character, then we'll go to the other ones. We knew that he was frustrated because the one didn't get a return. And initially when I thought of that story, I was like, well, of course, we're all frustrated with a person that doesn't give us the $1,000 back. We're like, I gave you opportunity. These 2 could do it. Why couldn't you? But I believe he's actually frustrated with himself. I think a humble leader recognizes that they made the mistake, and here was his mistake. He made the mistake of giving that guy $1,000.
So he owned that decision.
I believe, and we don't know, and I'm summarizing my perspective of this, but I think he was frustrated with himself. And why do I deduce that from that story? Because he would have given him all 5 if he thought they were equal, but he already knew the person that wasn't going to get a return. And so he is mad at himself because he was not a good steward of that money he had earned, the $16,000, the $15,000, whatever it would have been in that scenario, and gave it to the wrong person, and it was squandered. But then we look at his humility, because how many of us would have said, okay, you made me 10,000, now give me the 10,000, the whole 20,000 back. You made me 5,000, give me the whole 10,000 back. Give me the 1,000 back that you didn't make me. And afterwards, no, he was doing it for provision. What did he do? He took that 1,000 and gave it to the person that had the 20,000. And he's saying, it was never for me. It was always for you. And if you are performing, you will get more. And most investor would take their money back and say, thank you. I didn't have to work for that. Give me the money. But it shows his humility to say, it was never about me. It was always about developing you. I gave you amount of my time and or resources so that you could develop as a leader. And then when you developed as a leader, you can take that 20,000 and when we are able to teach leaders provisionally to develop, we provide resources, they give it back. Think of the sense of pride of that person with that 10,000 that made it 20,000. I got the approval. Now let's talk to that individual. I was a great steward of that resource. I doubled it thinking I might have had to give it back. It was never my money. Someone gave it to me. But now, wait a minute. I had the emotional success of doubling the money. So I could have just been the emotional success. And because I did such a good job of exponentially managing that, I got the person that was a poor steward, I got their $1,000 too. And so ultimately now what happens is that person goes back to his family, right? And now he's learned this leadership principle from this leader. And what can he do? Something similar. He can go say, hey, here's my story, and here's what happened. Somebody gave me 10,000, I made it 20,000. So I'm going to take that 20,000, which then became 21,000. I'm going to give you 10, you 5, you 1, right? So he has 21,000, and he now still has a 5,000 left that he didn't have at the beginning, and he has the opportunity to do the exact same thing, and that is exponential growth that can multiply and provide. If he followed that same principle, he would add $5,000 in that same exact scenario that he did not have before it started, and been able to invest in the next generation. To me, that is exponential. That is saying, okay, the growth was exponential in the resources. It provided for that individual, and then it multiplied, because if he did the exact same thing all the way down, he would have, one, been enriched by $5,000, but two, enriched three other people, and that would have been multiplied all the way through. And so to me, that's a story that encapsulates what we're trying to accomplish here. Choose the right leader, because he did make a mistake, right? He chose the guy with $1,000, didn't get a return, but he also reinvested in the best leader who got $10,000 in return.
He didn't take the money, and he could have just took the money as a leader. Man, I made some good investment. I'll take the money and run and go enjoy it. But he reinvested that, really probably at his expense.
Right.
He could have, who knows, done whatever he wanted to do with that money, but he reinvested. And not only will he probably earn more, but the reinvestment into that leader is going to create the same type of leadership model to other people.
And that is the developing leaders of leaders, right? That's the principle that is really applied in all these, podcasts for this season, is really saying, how do we develop that next group? And it really requires a depth of understanding. And that parable illustrates that, because of that humble leader, which we, by the way, don't even know his name. Think of the humility, right? And that's why I love that story at this stage in my life and career.
So, speaking about investment into an organization, the company you lead now, hundreds of millions of dollars in annual revenue, growing exponential year over year, double-digit growth. Wasn't always like that, right? There wasn't
No.
always comfortable offices and a lot of money to make decisions with. Talk about a time when you started early on, when you had to make a decision to invest in the company or invest in individuals at your own expense. What did that look like?
So first of all, this is a huge trap, right? Because if you are a humble leader, I read this book by Adam Grant, and it's Give and Take. And it describes three different types of people: the givers, the takers, and the matchers. And so the givers are people that are going to self-sacrifice. They're going to give of themselves. On the flip side, the takers are saying, I'm going to go find the biggest giver and take whatever that person's willing to give me. And the matchers saying, if you give me something, I'll give you something back.
Mm-hmm.
And so that happens in a subset of society. And so if you are someone that is intent on self-sacrificing, but you're doing so from a taker, they're only going to take, they're not going to multiply. So it goes back to the same point we're making. Make sure if you are making this investment, that the person you're making that investment of self-sacrifice for is willing to multiply that effect, right? Because you can give up that resource and sacrifice for your own sake to do that. So a story early on when I started as a franchise, I didn't understand that principle. And so I remember being an early franchisor. And one thing we do here is we provide financing for our franchisees. And so in that financing, part of that is even their payroll. And so
So you loan the money to we loan the money to the franchisees in
correct.
some cases.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's not on their personal credit. It's something that I'm doing against a receivable or an asset they have that, we
and
can.
some of them don't have the best credit.
So that was an early franchisee. This particular franchisee had been a government contractor and worked in, kind of an organization where everything, your tenure and pay went up automatically, irregardless of performance. So he started as a franchise and he'd be working for, in his case, probably 10 years in that. And so he's looking for a little bit of a break. He started his franchise. I said, okay, when are you going to launch? And he said, well, I'm going to launch in 90 days because I've been gone. I want to take my family on a vacation. So he took them to Disney World and he had some startup money. And then he's like, you know what? I really need to get started with this on my family, this, that, and the other thing. And all the while he's burning his cash. And so then he's like, uh-oh, I only have one left month of my house payment and my thing. I'm going to go bankrupt because that check's not coming in anymore. And he's like, I don't have enough to come from the business and he can't borrow. So that particular time, I didn't have any partners. At that particular time, I didn't have, a ton of cash. And so the only asset I had was my car. And so I remember talking to him. I said, you made these mistakes and you put yourself in this position. And I care about you and your young family. And I have one resource left that I have yet to sell. I cashed in my 401k. I'd burned up, largely the majority of my cash. I said, I'm going to sell my car, but here's the requirement from you. You will have to get to this revenue level and support yourself and work, patrols. We have a patrol model until it gets paid back. And so he's like, okay. And so I said, I'm going to call you every week because there's no accountability there,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to call you every week and we're going to do that. And sure enough, in a 3-month period of time, he was able to afford himself and begin to repay back the loan.
So he did do that.
He did do that in that case. Now, back to the beginning of the story on the givers and takers. What happened was it became an entitlement and enabled him because once he got over that accountability piece, he paid me back, I backed off on it, he fell right back into that same habit. And so what I realized back on the other side was I was enabling a bad habit with short-term accountability. And that is super hard for a leader to discern because am I truly teaching this person to fish or I'm enabling for a short period of time with accountability and I'm not getting the benefit of an exponential leader? And so when we're making those decisions of self-sacrifice, we need to go back to that and saying, am I giving to someone that will exponentially grow because I'm naturally and human as a giver in every area of my life? Or am I enabling a taker?
So, okay. So you're a leader. The more resources you get, the more people want, the more people are going to line up and ask. And particularly in the business model that we're in, we actually have a program where we lend, right? Where we can give and a lot of people take advantage of that and do well with that. However, to your point, there's people who are just going to take and they're going to look for ways to take advantage. How, as a leader, do you discern that? What are you looking for, and how can you head that off before it turns into a real problem?
So I've learned that the only person, the most likely person that I can hold accountable is myself. And so I can try and I can wish, I can hope, I can dream, I can teach, I can train all I want, but someone else has to make that choice. The only choices I can make are my own. I cannot force anyone else to make a choice. I can only control my choices. So then, and back to the story we started with, I look at that myself in that role of that leader that had the resource to give. I have to be a good steward of the resources I have. And so it goes back to discerning who I'm giving that to. And so am I one in that lending scenario that I got to take that $1,000 away from the person that buried it and give it to the person with 10,000 because that's good stewardship. Of course, the person I take that 1,000 away, they're crying, they're upset, they're saying, but, if we look at that story even deeper and you read the parable yourself, you're going to say, but I knew you were a miserly leader that would not expect me to get a return. So I was
That's what the servant was saying.
That's what the servant was saying to the leader. And the leader is saying, I understand that. It was not about me, or it was not about me at all. You should not have looked at me. You should have said, am I a good steward of the resource I've been given? Not looking at, and so every time I take that resource away from someone that's a poor financial steward, they're looking at me and saying, why did you do that to me? And I'm saying, no, you did that to yourself. Because the person that I gave the 10,000, he knew that was his opportunity and he ran with it.
And when do you determine, oh, this is greed? I see this is greed. I need to cut them off. How do you determine that? What do you look for?
I think it goes back to the earlier podcast we had, which is pretty obvious if you listen to their answer, right? And so it goes back to that learning disposition and that pride disposition in the application. So if they leave a training and they say, you know what, it validated what I already knew. That's the sentence that says it's greed. I am so good, so prideful, so arrogant that I can't learn anything else. Now, if I give them any other resource, what do you think they're going to do with it? I should be the one you invest in because I'm so good. Instead, you conversely say, thank you. Someone that says, thank you for that resource. I am going to own that like my own, right? So here's two different people, right? And I love my wife to death. And here's a good example. I rent cars when I travel all the time, right? And so those who rent cars, that's not your own asset. You look around it, if there's a couple scratches, you say, perfect. That's excuses in case something happens, or you're renting this car, you're going to turn it back in and you're just borrowing it from whatever dealership you're renting it from. And it's not your resource. You don't take care of it all, right? And you drive it all around. That's someone else's financial resource. So in that case, I'm probably not a good steward of a rental car company. Not that I intentionally drive it somewhere else, but I'm not taking care of it like I may take care of my own car, but there's not much of a difference. However, I remember renting a car, especially early in my marriage with my wife. And we'd go rent that car. And she's like, well, we need to pick every little speck off that thing. We need to go through the car wash and get it. And ultimately,
no, we don't.
I'm like, she stewarded everything well. It was like she treated it as her own. And she says, if I'm going to borrow something, I'm going to get it back in a better condition than if I had my own. I'm like, well, this is the rental car company. And I tell you, they drive it around, they peel out and everything else. And so that's the type of stewardship you're looking for. Someone that in that rental car scenario is treating it as their own resource, and in some cases better, right? Even though in that scenario, it's a rental car, which we've all probably had that experience that is not our resource. And so that's when you're saying, is this someone that'll steward that resource better than me?
So it really sounds like it comes down to a lot of communication with that person. So you can kind of check their pulse, see where they're at, see if you see the greed bubbling to the surface in the way that they communicate with you, the way that they, for example, appreciate the resources that are available,
Right.
or they're starting to show entitlement, or they're starting to show that, oh, I know all that already, I deserve all that already, I got this all that lack of humility and that greed, and that's when maybe you start realizing, you know what, maybe I'm enabling instead
right.
of helping.
And a lot of it's the approach. And this is the earliest sign. The more desperate and the more aggressive they are to get your resource, the more likely it's out of greed. So as we go back to that story where we started, I think it kind of illustrates the point that we're trying to make here, which is that story about the 10,000, 5,000, and 1,000. Now, if all three of them were standing there and the 10,000, I'm the best one, they're beating their chest, give me the 10,000, right? They are demonstrating a element of greed. That didn't happen in this scenario, but that could have happened, right? Because look, last time I got you 10,000, it's me, and I spend it well, right? I'm the best, and that's where you hear that message that was there. Now, that was definitely not the scenario in that parable. And so you didn't see greed. Now, the other side of that is we definitely don't want someone on the exact opposite side that's afraid. Like, well, and that was the person with a 1,000 saying, I was so afraid when you gave it to me. I'm not a good steward of that resource either. So there's two components of that, greed and fear. If we have somebody that is super greedy, then we don't want to give it to them. If we have someone that's super afraid of you to hand that to them, then maybe we need to make sure that fear is not unfounded and they can manage it well. They just, have respect, which fear is a ancillary word to respect. We want to make sure they're confident and humble. And that's a difficult line to walk, right? Because we want to give our resources to someone that's confident they can get a return on it, but humble in the way they approach that. So ultimately saying, yes, I will be a wonderful steward. Thank you for this resource. I will manage it as my own, like the rental car, and you can trust me with this resource. I'm not going to produce it arrogantly, and I'm not afraid to drive.
You don't
right?
want them paralyzed by fear, like in the parable where he buried it.
So let's
right?
continue on the rental car thing because I think it's super relevant and tangible. So just as my wife, she's also a diligent driver, right? I mean, some people, I remember when I graduated college, I started this job in a Fortune 500 company, and I was going with this guy traveling, and he's like looking at which car he wanted to pick because sometimes you can go pick the car you want to pick,
Yeah.
and he knew the car, the make, and the motor, and
For the
ultimately
rental car.
of the rental
Okay.
cars. I'm like, okay, and so I'll never forget. There was an Oldsmobile Alero. They didn't even make it anymore, I don't think. But it was right there. He's like, that's a car we want. I said, why is that? He goes, oh, the power to weight ratio. And I'm like, I literally, he's like, just sit in the seat. You'll enjoy this. I was like, okay. And so then I thought we were Formula One racing. I didn't know that he was the only one racing. But I mean, he pushed that thing to the limits and he goes, this thing can go up to 7,000 RPM without burning the engine. I'm like, okay, I think we just want to get to the lunch. You know what I mean? It's like,
Just
I
getting
don't
to
really
a
care.
meeting is all
Yeah,
we're doing.
exactly. And he goes, well, I always pick the rental car because it's my opportunity to test its limits. I was like, okay, so he's on the other side. I'm like, and now I will say he was a funny guy. It was somewhat entertaining. Entertaining because anytime your life's on the line, it's somewhat entertaining. I mean, you're paying attention at least. But he was a bad steward on that side, right? He was just driving it to its exceptional limits. Conversely, you have those people that get a rental car and they can't even get out of the rental car thing. They're like hitting the brakes back and forth. They don't know how anything works. They're super afraid to drive. They're like inching up. And I'm like, do you not know how to ever drive a car? And they're driving in complete and utter fear, right? And so what do we want? A normal driver, someone that's not racing a Formula One race and someone that's not going 25 miles an hour under the
Right.
speed limit. And so that is who we should invest in, right? The confident people, they're confident driving, but they're also humble. They're not racing that car all on every street, and they're certainly not afraid to drive in that new city as well. And those are the people we want to invest our time and energy and resources into.
Now, what are some skills that leaders need to develop in order to build this provisional approach?
Yeah, so this is going to be super practical, right? Because I think we live in the practical. We do tasks in the practical. So I want to give it here. And I think there's 3 things that we should do that are doing that. And the first is we must learn to ask. In order to learn where we give resources and ultimately provide resources, we need to ask questions that are relevant. We need to ask, how are you going to use that resource? What is the benefit of that resource to you and otherwise? And we listen to their answer. If they're saying things that are pride-based, like we talked about, or aggressive, or fear-based, so we listen. Then as a result of that, we will learn and that'll develop our intuition. So pretty soon, and I remember being 15, 16 years old and learning to drive. I thought everybody's a great driver, or I'm a great driver, whatever I think at 16, like every other 16-year-old. Then what I learned over time is there's a reason that insurance is high for 16-year-olds.
Right, yeah.
Because it's not equating to their confidence, it's equating to their ability.
Right.
So then I'm like, okay, what they say or believe, we have to say, is that actually true, right? Because I have yet to talk. What do they say that like 75% of people believe they're above average and everything? And like, well, the numbers don't make sense. So that means we have to develop discernment by listening continually, saying, now they're saying that, but do their actions meet to my specifications, their words? Are they going to be a good steward of that? And that's where intuition comes in. And we're doing that by asking similar questions in every environment, because if we get a similar question, we'll get a different answer, but at least our starting point will be the same. Then we listen to their answer and we say, is it greed or aggressiveness, or is it fear or conservative? Because the stewardship is generally speaking in the middle. Confident people that are humble live in the middle of those 2 things. They're confident in their abilities, but they're humble. And that humble is not because of fear that, oh, I'm no good. That's not humility. That's actually insecurity. It's saying that, yes, I am great, but I'm not going to tell you I'm great. You're going to see and know that I'm great. And that's humility, not insecurity, because we can confuse on the other side insecurity and humility, and that's a trap.
Well, we've come to the end of our time together here on ReedFlections, a podcast on life, leadership, and learning. Episode 4, 1 through 4, was why we develop leaders. Potential, experiential, exponential, and provisional. Did you come up with all that?
I did, and I was trying to make it hard for you to pronounce.
You did.
Thank
well
you.
done. Thank you very much for tuning in with us. Thank you very much, Reed, for sharing with us. Episode 5 is going to be next. We'll think more about who to develop as leaders and the role of character. Until then, stay purposeful. I'm Art Calderon.
If you are a leader intent on developing other leaders, recognize that the environment that you are creating will provide for others. So, as we discussed here, use discernment on both sides. One, are you investing in someone that will and has the interest in providing for others? And number two, are you the person that's being invested in, and are you doing that to provide for others? Do an inventory of your motive. Do that right now. Are you someone that is there for the benefit of others? Your leadership journey will be held up to the greatest degree by your desire for self-interest. But if you can change that, do a 180 and focus on providing for others, you will go way further than you ever imagined. I challenge you to make that decision today, and I look forward to seeing you next time.